Part 1. The courtroom tension. The courtroom was bustling with activity as people filed in, their whispers filling the air like static electricity. Today was a high-profile hearing, and emotions were running high. Among the spectators was Maya Johnson, a poised and confident black woman who had spent years climbing the ranks to become one of the youngest federal prosecutors in the country. Her presence in the courtroom was deliberate, though she chose to sit inconspicuously in the back row, diligently reviewing her notes for an upcoming case. Maya had grown accustomed to the microaggressions that came with her position, a raised eyebrow, a dismissive tone, or a prolonged glance as if to question her credentials. But today would prove to be more than she anticipated. Two bailiffs standing like sentinels at the courtroom's entrance exchanged glances when they noticed Maya. Officer Daniels, a burly man with a sharp jawline, leaned toward his colleague and whispered something. The smirk that followed didn't escape Maya's notice, but she kept her focus on her file. She was here to observe the proceedings, not engage with petty prejudices. The room quieted as the judge entered. "All rise," barked Daniels. The crowd obeyed in unison, the shuffling of feet and rustling of papers creating a brief cacophony. Maya, engrossed in her notes, took a moment longer to stand. That split second of delay was all it took. Daniel's eyes narrowed and his colleague, Officer Mitchell, nudged him. "What's her deal?" Daniels muttered. "Think she's too good to stand for the judge?" "She's probably lost," Mitchell quipped. "Doesn't look like she belongs here." Ignoring the simmering prejudice, Maya stood and resumed her seat when the judge gestured for everyone to sit. But the bailiffs had already made up their minds. Approaching her with an air of authority, Daniels cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you need to leave." Maya looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. This area is for authorized personnel and spectators. You don't seem to fit into either category." Maya's calm demeanor didn't falter. "I'm a federal prosecutor here to observe the case." Daniels scoffed. "Nice try. Let's not make a scene. Step outside now." "I have every right to be here," Maya countered, her voice firm but measured. "If you check my credentials." But Daniels wasn't interested in her credentials. Grabbing her arm, he motioned for Mitchell to assist. The crowd murmured in shock as the two men forcibly dragged Maya toward the exit. The judge, visibly perturbed, slammed his gavel. "What is going on here?" "Your Honor," Daniels began, his tone self-assured, "this woman was causing a disturbance and refused to comply with instructions." Maya, now standing near the doorway, straightened her posture. "Your Honor, I was sitting quietly reviewing case notes. These officers assumed I didn't belong here without any justification." The judge's brow furrowed as he took in the scene. "Let her go immediately," he commanded. Turning to Maya, he added, "Please step forward and identify yourself." Maya walked to the front of the courtroom, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Handing over her ID, she introduced herself. "Maya Johnson, federal prosecutor assigned to this district." The revelation sent a wave of murmurs through the audience. Daniel's face turned a shade of crimson, but the judge's expression darkened. "Officers, return to your post. Ms. Johnson, my apologies for this unfortunate misunderstanding." Part 2. The fallout begins. As Maya returned to her seat, the courtroom was abuzz with whispered conversations. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, some filled with sympathy, others with curiosity. Yet Maya kept her composure, her face a mask of professionalism. The judge, visibly irritated by the disruption, called for order. Slamming the gavel down once more, he addressed the bailiff sternly. "Daniels, Mitchell, my chambers, now." The officers glanced at each other, their smug confidence replaced with unease. Reluctantly, they followed the judge out of the courtroom. The door closed behind them, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Maya, now sitting alone, could hear the murmurs around her. Can you believe that? Did they really not know who she was? This is why these things keep happening. She ignored the comments, focusing instead on steadying her breathing. This wasn't the first time she had faced overt discrimination, but the public nature of the incident had left a sting. She pulled out her notebook, jotting down key points from the case she was observing, but her mind kept drifting to the bailiffs and their brazen actions. Behind closed doors, in the judge's chambers, Daniels and Mitchell stood stiffly, their earlier bravado replaced with a nervous energy. "Do you two have any idea what you've done?" the judge demanded, his voice low but furious. "That woman is a federal prosecutor, one of the most respected in this district, and you humiliated her in front of an entire courtroom." Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, we were just doing our job. She didn't look like she belonged." The judge's fist came down on his desk, cutting him off. "Didn't look like she belonged. And what exactly does someone who belongs look like, Officer Daniels? Enlighten me." Mitchell, sensing the gravity of the situation, attempted to interject. "Your Honor, it was a misunderstanding. We—" "Save it," the judge snapped. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with your department. Expect an inquiry." The officers exchanged a worried glance. The judge dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "Get out of my sight." As they exited the chambers, Daniels muttered under his breath, "All this over some woman who doesn't know her place." Mitchell frowned but said nothing. For the first time, he wondered if they had crossed a line. Maya takes action. Back in the courtroom, Maya continued to take notes, but her mind was racing. This wasn't just about her. It was about a systemic issue that needed addressing. She decided she wouldn't let the incident slide. After the hearing concluded, Maya approached the judge. "Your Honor, thank you for stepping in earlier. I appreciate it." The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ms. Johnson, I am deeply sorry for what happened. Those officers were out of line." "They were more than out of line," Maya replied. "This kind of behavior isn't just an inconvenience, it's a threat to justice. If they're willing to treat me this way, imagine how they treat people without my credentials." The judge nodded. "You're absolutely right. I'll support you in whatever action you decide to take." Maya left the courthouse with a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, she drafted a formal complaint detailing the incident and submitted it to the police department and the district attorney's office. She also reached out to a trusted journalist friend, knowing that shedding light on the issue was the first step toward accountability. The media storm. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines like "Federal Prosecutor Targeted by Courtroom Bailiffs" and "Racial Profiling in Our Justice System" dominated the news cycle. Maya's phone rang nonstop with calls from reporters, colleagues, and community leaders. At first, Maya was hesitant to step into the spotlight. She had always believed in working quietly behind the scenes, letting her actions speak for themselves. But this time was different. She agreed to a few key interviews, using the platform to advocate for systemic change. "I'm not speaking out for myself," she told one reporter. "I'm speaking out for everyone who has been silenced, dismissed, or humiliated because of systemic bias. This isn't just my fight, it's all of ours." Her words resonated deeply, sparking a wave of support. Social media was flooded with messages of solidarity, and petitions demanding the officer's suspension gained thousands of signatures overnight. Part 3. The inquiry unfolds. As the public outcry grew, the police department had no choice but to launch an internal investigation into the incident. Daniels and Mitchell were placed on administrative leave, their badges and service weapons temporarily confiscated. The officers, once so confident, now found themselves under intense scrutiny. Maya's formal complaint had been thorough, detailing not just the incident but also its broader implications. She had included examples of similar cases of racial profiling she had encountered in her legal career, painting a clear picture of a systemic issue. The department's leadership couldn't ignore it. At the same time, Maya's story was gaining traction in legal and activist circles. Community leaders organized rallies outside the courthouse, holding signs with slogans like "Justice for all, not just the privileged," and "End systemic bias now." Maya chose to attend one of the rallies. Standing in front of the crowd, she felt the weight of their expectations, but also their unwavering support. "I'm not here because I want revenge," she said, her voice steady but firm. I'm here because we deserve a justice system that works for everyone, not just a select few. This isn't just about me. It's about changing the culture of bias that has gone unchecked for far too long. Her speech was met with thunderous applause, and videos of the rally quickly went viral. Maya's courage and eloquence became a rallying cry for those fighting against injustice. Daniels and Mitchell faced the music. In the days following the rally, Daniels and Mitchell were summoned to a formal hearing. The panel included senior officers, a representative from the district attorney's office, and an external diversity consultant brought in to ensure impartiality. The evidence against the bailiffs was damning. Witnesses from the courtroom testified about their aggressive behavior, while surveillance footage captured the moment they dragged Maya out without cause. Their casual dismissal of her credentials and the smug comments they made afterward painted a picture of not just incompetence, but also deeply ingrained prejudice. When it was their turn to speak, Daniels doubled down. "I was following protocol," he insisted. "She didn't look like she belonged, and I acted accordingly." The room fell silent. The panel chair, a stern-looking woman with decades of experience in law enforcement, leaned forward. "And what exactly does someone who belongs look like, Officer Daniels?" Daniels faltered, realizing too late that his words had betrayed his bias. Mitchell, on the other hand, took a different approach. "I admit we made a mistake," he said, his voice subdued. "But it wasn't malicious. We acted on instinct, and in hindsight it was wrong." His partial acknowledgement earned him some leniency, but the damage was done. The panel recommended disciplinary action, including mandatory training on racial bias and a public apology to Maya. The power of accountability. Maya watched the hearing from her office, her emotions a mix of satisfaction and sadness. The consequences for Daniels and Mitchell were necessary, but they were just a small step in a much larger fight. She received a call from the police commissioner later that evening. "Ms. Johnson," he began, "I want to personally apologize for what happened. The actions of those officers were unacceptable, and I assure you we're committed to making real changes." Maya appreciated the sentiment but remained skeptical. "Words are a start, Commissioner, but they're not enough. I want to see tangible reforms, mandatory training, better hiring practices, and a clear zero-tolerance policy for this kind of behavior." The commissioner agreed, inviting her to join a task force aimed at addressing systemic bias within the justice system. It was an opportunity Maya couldn't pass up. If her experience could lead to meaningful change, then it would all be worth it. A ripple effect. As news of the hearing spread, so did its impact. Other victims of racial profiling began coming forward, inspired by Maya's bravery. Community organizations ramped up their efforts to hold institutions accountable, and policymakers took notice. Maya's story became a case study in legal and social justice circles, illustrating the power of resilience and advocacy. It was taught in law schools and discussed at conferences, a reminder that change often begins with a single voice refusing to stay silent. For Maya, life returned to a new normal. She continued her work as a federal prosecutor, balancing her demanding career with her newfound role as an advocate for systemic reform. The incident in the courtroom had been painful, but it had also been transformative, both for her and for the broader community. Part 4. A movement is born. The fallout from Maya's ordeal went far beyond the confines of her courtroom. Across the nation, her story had ignited conversations about racial bias, systemic inequality, and the urgent need for reform. What began as a personal struggle had evolved into a full-fledged movement, with Maya at its center. Her appointment to the police commissioner's task force quickly became a turning point. The group, composed of legal experts, community leaders, and law enforcement representatives, worked tirelessly to draft recommendations for systemic change. Maya, ever the passionate advocate, took a leading role. During one meeting, she spoke directly to the law enforcement representatives present. "I'm not here to vilify you," she said. "I'm here to remind you of the oath you took, to serve and protect, not to profile and discriminate. It's time we rebuild trust, starting from the ground up." The task force proposed several sweeping reforms: mandatory implicit bias training. All officers, from rookies to seasoned veterans, would be required to attend regular sessions aimed at uncovering and addressing unconscious biases. Community oversight committees. Each precinct would establish a civilian-led board to review complaints against officers and ensure transparency in investigations. Stricter hiring practices. Background checks and psychological evaluations would include assessments for racial bias, ensuring only those committed to fairness and equity join the force. Zero-tolerance policies. Officers found guilty of discriminatory actions would face immediate and severe consequences, including termination and loss of pension benefits. The task force's proposals were met with resistance in some quarters, particularly from entrenched elements within law enforcement. But the growing tide of public support for change was impossible to ignore. Maya's role in the movement made her a lightning rod for both praise and criticism, but she remained undeterred. Maya's growing platform. As her profile grew, so did the invitations to speak at conferences, universities, and community events. Maya used every opportunity to highlight the systemic issues she had encountered, often drawing on her own experience as a federal prosecutor and as the victim of racial profiling. During one particularly memorable speech at a national legal symposium, she said, "Change doesn't come from silence. It comes from courage, from standing up, speaking out, and demanding better from the systems that claim to serve us." My story is just one of many, but together our voices can create a chorus too loud to ignore. Her words were met with a standing ovation, and clips of the speech went viral online. Young lawyers and activists began reaching out to Maya, seeking her guidance and mentorship. She welcomed them with open arms, determined to cultivate a new generation of advocates committed to justice. Daniels and Mitchell's redemption journey. Back in her own city, the officers responsible for Maya's humiliation, Daniels and Mitchell, were undergoing their own transformations. Daniels, who had initially resisted the consequences of his actions, began to reflect on the impact of his behavior. His mandatory bias training sessions were eye-opening, forcing him to confront the prejudices he had long ignored. Mitchell, on the other hand, sought Maya out directly. He sent her a heartfelt letter, apologizing for his role in the incident and expressing his desire to make amends. "I can't undo what I did," he wrote, "but I can strive to do better. I've begun volunteering with community organizations to learn about the experiences of people I've failed to serve. I hope one day I can earn your forgiveness." Maya, though initially skeptical, chose to meet with him. Their conversation was candid and emotional, with Mitchell admitting his flaws and vowing to be a better ally moving forward. Maya, ever pragmatic, told him, "Change doesn't happen overnight, but acknowledgement is the first step. Now it's up to you to turn words into action." The ripple effect continues. Months after the incident, Maya received a letter from a young black law student who had been inspired by her story. "Seeing you stand up to injustice gave me the courage to pursue my dreams," the letter read. "You reminded me that we belong in every room, even the ones that try to shut us out." Letters like this became a regular occurrence, filling Maya with a renewed sense of purpose. Her ordeal had been painful, but it had also sparked a wave of empowerment and change. She realized that her journey was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Legacy in the making. As Maya stood in her office one evening, gazing at the city skyline, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The fight for justice was ongoing, but she was no longer alone. The movement she had helped ignite was growing stronger every day, fueled by the collective determination of countless individuals committed to a fairer, more equitable world. Her phone buzzed with a text from a colleague. "Another precinct has adopted the task force's recommendations. Change is happening, Maya. You did this." Smiling, Maya replied, "We did this, and we're just getting started." In the end, Maya's story was about more than one woman's battle against injustice. It was a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of accountability, and the unyielding belief that a better future is possible, if only we have the courage to demand it.